The president said it wasn't a tax, didn't he?
Well, Justice Scalia, there's two things about that. First is it seems to me what matters is what power Congress was exercising. And I think it's clear that they were exercising the tax power as well as.
You're making two arguments. Number one, it's a tax, and number two, even if it isn't a tax, it's within the taxing power. I'm just addressing the first.
What the president said
is it a tax or not a tax? The president didn't think it was.
The president said it wasn't a tax increase because it ought to be understood as an incentive to get people to have insurance. I don't think it's fair to infer from that anything about whether this is an exercise of the tax power or not.
I suppose, though, General, one question is whether the determined efforts of Congress not to refer to this as a tax make a difference. I mean, you're suggesting we should just look to the practical operation, we shouldn't look at labels, and that seems right, except that here we have a case in which Congress determinedly said this is not a tax, and the question is why should that be irrelevant?
I don't think that that's a fair characterization of the actions of Congress here, Justice Kagan. The legislative history is replete with members of Congress explaining that this law is constitutional as an exercise of the taxing power. It was attacked as a tax by its opponents. So I don't think this is a situation where you can say that Congress was avoiding any mention of the tax power. It would be one thing if Congress explicitly disavowed an exercise of the tax power, but given that it hasn't done so, it seems to me that it's not only is it fair to read this as an exercise of the tax power, but this Court has got an obligation to construe it as an exercise of the tax power if it can be upheld on that basis.
Well, why didn't Congress call it a tax then?
Well,
you're telling me they thought of it as a tax, they defended it on the tax power. Why didn't they say it was a tax?
They might have thought, Your Honor, that calling it a penalty as they did would make it more effective in accomplishing its objectives. But it is in the Internal Revenue Code. It is collected by the IRS on April 15th. I don't think this is a situation in which you can say.
So that's the reason. They thought it might be more effective if they called it a penalty.
Well, there's nothing that I know of that illuminates that.
So you're saying that all the discussion we had earlier about how this is one big uniform scheme and the Commerce Clause, blah, 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 it really doesn't matter. This is a tax, and the federal government could simply have said, without all of the rest of this legislation, could simply have said, everybody who doesn't buy health insurance at a certain age will be taxed so much money, right? It used its powers together to solve the problem of the market not providing but you didn't need that.
You
didn't need that. If it's a tax, it's only raising money is enough.
It is justifiable under its tax power. If I may reserve the balance of my time.